What I thought might be helpful, just to place this in context, is just to give you a sense of where we're coming from, because the whole presentation I'm going to go through today is, I suppose, some pretty fundamental and straightforward things that I think a lot of people understand, certainly a lot of people in the room that I'm familiar with, having spoken with a lot of you. But I think it's all a question of perspective, and all a question of where you're situated in the market. So at GHD, we view ourselves as being, I suppose, at the coalface, so to speak. Our clients are, global and Australia-wide, certainly in the water industry, pretty much every water utility in the land and client that makes use of water in any capacity. So we're coming at this from their perspective, understanding their needs, their challenges, the quality of information they rely upon, and the challenges they experience and are looking for solutions around. So that's where we come in. I mean, we get calls every day from these people saying, help us out, we've got the problem, find the solution for us. And that's the nature of our business. So it's very much, we need the solution, it has to work, help us out. To place it in context, I suppose, innovation at GHD, a couple of years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, we found that our clients were loving the nature of our work and the quality of our interaction, but they got this consistent theme back in a number of our surveys, saying, well, look, you're a safe set of hands, we like you, but you're perhaps not as innovative as you could be. We don't get the out-of-the-box solution sometimes. So we took that to heart about 5 or 6 years ago and established our innovation program. And I suppose where we're coming from, Paul and myself, is looking at the lens through that innovation program at GHD, where we try and capture all the ideas from all of our engineers around the globe and use those ideas to help break down barriers and come up with, I suppose, positive solutions in the market. So it's not just a question of, I suppose, is this idea really good and how can it be applied? It's how can we make use of that idea to achieve not just one person's ends and one person's means, but I suppose industry-wide trends and overcome industry-wide issues. So that's where we're coming from. And so when we say commercialisation, it's not necessarily in the classic sense that you may all appreciate commercialisation, in the sense that let's find a nifty little widget and license it out to someone and make some money out of it. We think that it's a little bit more sophisticated than that. It's been able to take an innovative concept and reposition that argument in a multitude of ways to have some industry-wide relevance to address some existing challenges and needs. And a single idea is quite a valuable thing to be able to do that. Given the fact when you take a step back, that single idea can speak to so many needs and so many challenges, such that it can really allow you to have a very productive discussion in the market. So that's certainly where we're coming from. And in my role as commercialisation manager, it's my job to take the ideas from around our organisation and pitch them and reposition them in a way that is of benefit to the wider water industry as well, and of course for our own company. Now, just to place it in context, why we're here talking today is, I suppose there's two things. Firstly, we're going to be speaking with a cross-section of the projects this afternoon. But secondly, I suppose this is in very much a sense a follow-on from some previous work that we've done with the centre, working with 3 projects that you heard about this morning. I think Jay's project, Tim's project and Michael's project as well. And what we did there was what we termed a commercialisation snapshot report on behalf of the centre. So that's very much what we did. And I suppose just to expand on why we were doing that, I suppose it was really just to apply that same commercialisation perspective to that quality of research. So not so much to focus on how can you make money out of this idea, so much as how can you position this idea to meet some current industry challenges, some current industry needs, and have some productive discussions with the market with what you've already got, just by repositioning the argument and involving the right people in the discussion. So that's very much why we were doing that, and I think that's slap bang in with the centre's mission as far as I understand it. So the simple way that we did that, I mean, our whole business is predicated on people that interact with the market every day, but it's somewhat unwieldy, I would have thought, just to have 100 engineers meeting with the project teams in question and saying, well, hey, this is great research, here are all the opportunities and here's what you need to think about. So we produced some simple tools that we felt was quite helpful in that approach. And there's no complexity here. I mean, we're not about introducing complexity into this environment. For us, the simple tools were just, okay, here are the questions that our clients are going to have to, or going to want to know or have answers to. And here is the way that you can communicate some of this information to us in a really effective and, I suppose, efficient manner, such that we can distribute it amongst the marketplace and amongst our own individuals and give you some really productive feedback. So we would try not to overcomplicate things, basically, was the general approach that we adopted. Now, based on that work that we did, I suppose there were some key themes that came out just in looking at the research, and I suppose in listening to the report, your presentations this morning, I suppose it just reaffirmed my view on this, which is, first and foremost, I mean, there is some really excellent research in the room. I mean, it's leading edge, really, in terms of the issues you're talking to, the market challenges that you're addressing, and the parties that you're working with. So I think that's, goes without saying. But I think, sometimes, certainly in looking at the research portfolio that the Centre has, I mean, there is this view that people feel that just because it's quality research, the market's going to pick it up and run with it. And I think we would all agree that that's perhaps a bit of an oversimplification. Quality research doesn't always sort of win the day. And when you look at things from our side of the market, and we'll get into this afternoon, and the kind of drivers and questions and challenges that the market has in adopting new technology, I think you'll begin to appreciate that there's quite a number of complex factors that contribute to that, which we've attempted to actually sort of articulate so that we can go through and have a productive discussion amongst the research projects that we're working with this afternoon. I think another thing that sort of stood out from that work that we did was, it's again perhaps an oversimplification to say just because we have industry partners on board, there is going to be an adoption occurring here. I mean, the nature of that interaction with those industry partners was excellent and may ensure some adoption from their perspective. As far as the wider industry is concerned, that may not be the case. They may be involved for a very particular reason, for an immediate challenge that they're experiencing, but not necessarily something that's of wider relevance to the industry. So I think it has to be appreciated that you can take that step back in that interaction with that industry partner and say, okay, well, while we're addressing these needs, the work that we're producing still can be of relevance to the wider industry, and how can we present that information, and who do we need to talk to to be able to do that? And I suppose that leads on to the fundamental aim that we saw here, was there was always an opportunity for wider engagement. We saw there was very simple and effective just to be able to pick up the phone and talk to the right people, just to advise them on the nature of your research. And what we saw as a really positive opportunity there in the very limited work we did is every time you do pick up that phone and engage more broadly, everyone's going to be able to provide you with some data sets, some interactions, some resources that is of direct assistance. And we felt that was a really positive thing as well. And I suppose summing all this up, I mean, listening to a lot of the presentations today and certainly in reviewing the portfolio, it seems like at its fundamental core, a lot of people think that adoption is relatively straightforward. Good research, run a trial of some description, and then it will become implemented. And from the work that we were doing and the way that we look at the world, we feel that that's maybe a little bit of an oversimplification. And we think that if you actually take the time to look at it a bit closely and understand some of the value drivers and questions that comprise that more complicated view, that it's a very simple step just to be able to, I suppose, reposition and re-articulate research that you're already doing and insights that you've already generated to be able to, I suppose, ensure relevance to a wider cross-section of industry. So that was, I suppose, the overall thoughts on that previous work that we did. In terms of why we think that it's important, well, the second point is pretty straightforward, because the Centre's mission is for the wider adoption of research on an industry-wide level, not just on a case-by-case basis. So that's pretty straightforward. But I think this is a really important point to hit. I mean, a lot of people sort of hear these words and sort of say, well, we've got a research project, we're doing X through Y, and that's it. And quality research, if it's quality, will be adopted by the market. That's probably some merit to that, but we feel that through delivering this wider mission of engaging with industry more broadly, there are some really compelling benefits to enhance the quality of the research itself. And I think that'll come out very much in our session this afternoon when we start to understand the collaborative touch points between a lot of the projects. I mean, one was already mentioned when Shihu made the direct causal link between his and Tim's project is a classic example there as well. So that's, I suppose, the opportunity for collaboration in the room. Think about, more broadly and more widely in the industry, the opportunities for collaboration there. Picking up the phone, engaging with an end user and an industry partner that you hadn't previously made contact with or been aware of. I mean, those individuals have proprietary data sets they might have generated over a period of time. They have quality benchmarking data sets you might want to make use of. Obviously, expertise, access to sites where you might be able to run some of your experimental protocols on. They themselves would have invested millions, I would suspect, on establishing new experimental protocols that were somewhat similar to the experimental protocols that you yourselves are running through your project. So there is a great opportunity not only to, I suppose, engage more widely and have people appreciate the relevancy of a work, but also to involving them in that journey, get a lot more out of it for your own research, would be our thoughts, and certainly what we observed in that first body of work that we did. So, just to put a ring around it, I mean, when I say that we're talking about pretty simple concepts here, when we talk about the tools that we applied in that first body of work, what we're really talking about are just some simple frameworks that we use to capture some simple questions and some simple perspectives. So when you've got such talented individuals such as those in the room and all those people at GHD that do this day in, day out, and many for 30, 40 years of their life, you want a way to be able to capture this information in a really effective way. So for us it boiled down to 4 key tools, and we'll be making use of a couple of these today as well. So the first is obviously the question of perspective, and the tool that we're applying there is pretty straightforward. The engagement or this interaction was being managed by GHD, and our perspective is one of the market. We are approaching this from a market perspective with clients that have budgets, and those budgets are there to address some existing needs and not much else. So that's very much the perspective that we were able to bring to this, and that's a valuable tool. The second thing that we made use of is this thing called the logic model, which is essentially just a glorified way of being able to reconceptualize a classic project plan into some constituent elements, being what are you producing, what are you doing with what that thing is you're producing, what is the tangible output of that, and what's the outcome you're trying to influence. So what it does is, I suppose, deconstruct your project plan into some logical steps. And what that allows you to do is allows you to test the logic of each of those steps and makes it very apparent for anyone who's looking at that logic model to say, okay, I understand what these people are doing. And that's a tool that's very much used in evaluation exercises. So with large government programs investing lots and lots of money, they use that sort of framework to be able to say, okay, you've said with all these things, you've produced these tangible outputs, this report, this data set, whatever it is. And as a result of that, you're saying you're going to influence this outcome in the market, being the industry is going to adopt this technology, apply it, it's going to have these cost benefits and so on and so forth. What this sort of logic model approach allows you to do is say, okay, well, these are all the things you're producing, so you've made the assumption that if you produce these things and only these things, you're going to be able to influence that outcome. And I think when you use this tool, you'll be able to sit there and anyone will say, well, is a report simply going to be enough to be able to do this? And by doing that, it will encourage you to think, okay, well, what else are we producing in this? Because we're pretty confident we're going to be producing that outcome. So what other tangible things are we producing in our project that is ultimately going to be influencing that outcome? And that whole process allows you to go through this and list the really valuable assets and get to the nub of what are the valuable assets that you're producing in your research. And by doing that, I think it makes it very easy to understand some opportunities for collaboration as well. I mean, the classic example I use with this logic model one is that quite often the assets that you think you're producing that are quite valuable aren't perhaps as valuable as some assets you've produced in your research that you may not have been aware of or just haven't thought about because you've been so focused on the outcome. And a classic example is, I think, in software projects from my experience, where you send a group of people on site, they come up with some user requirements, and use those user requirements to produce software of some description, and they're engaged to produce that software. more often than not, the software isn't the most valuable asset that's produced in those interactions. Actually, if you look at those organisations and what value they got out of it, and from a commercialisation perspective too, by the way, it's actually those user requirement documents themselves that were actually of most value to them. This whole logic model approach allows you to deconstruct the project and think, what are the valuable assets that we have here? How can we share them? How can we supplement them? And test your assumptions. If we produce these things, are we really going to be influencing that outcome, or are there some assumptions we've made here? And if so, how can we minimise the impact of those assumptions on our research, and how can we supplement our knowledge by involving other people to de-risk those assumptions? So that was the logic model. The other thing that we produced, which I think was of most value, and I suppose where an organisation like GHD and the other design consultancies out there as well have a particular advantage, is because of our position in the market, we're constantly aware of the opportunities out there, who has budgets, who has needs, who has challenges, who has an understanding of what they want to do in the next couple of years. And we distilled a lot of our thoughts on how to apply your research, or the research that we considered, against some of those opportunities. And by doing that, it really sort of opened, I think, a lot of eyes as to the spectrum of opportunities that are out there. I mean, there's this strong thought that, okay, we're going to produce some research and we're going to find a wastewater treatment plant, run a trial and then adopt it there. But if you look at the quality of that research and you look at some of these opportunity matrices that we produced, when you take a step back, you'll see that there really are some really wide-ranging impacts of the research that you're producing, and some opportunities associated with those. And when you look at the nature of those opportunities and the parties that might be interested, you'll find that your research has some really wide-ranging and extraordinary impacts if you took the time to pick up the phone and maybe talk to some of those other people and say, hey, here's the nature of our research. Do you want to be involved? Do you want to provide us with some assistance? And I think that was a really valuable, probably the most valuable component of that opportunity matrix, those deliverables. And the final thing that we produced is just having regard to these two things, an understanding of what you're producing, what the most valuable assets are, any assumptions you've made, and having a look at all the potential opportunities out there in the market. I mean, what can we learn from this, just from a project planning perspective? Are there any ways that you feel, armed with this knowledge and this wider perspective, this wider market-based perspective, that you'll be able to enhance the quality of your research, maybe retweak some of the language you use, or capture existing things you've produced and just pitch it in a slightly different way, or have a slightly different discussion? So that's where we got to with that work that we did there. And just to give you a sense of this, I know you won't be able to read that, but most of the people in the room, I've sent out versions of these sorts of outputs too. But it just shows you these are really straightforward things. I mean, they're just key questions to address in a table form, really. So I suppose just to sum up where we're coming from and why we think that the commercialisation approach was quite relevant from an industry perspective, a research perspective, was, I mean, commercialisation, I've often formed the view, isn't so much a discipline as much as a ragtag collection of skills, be it business development, strategy formation, I suppose just an ability to be able to re-pitch ideas in a different way. So I'd encourage you not to overthink it and think, okay, well, it's a discipline in and of itself. Really, it just comes back down to your ability to answer some fundamental questions and to put yourself in the market's shoes and say, well, what is this person's drivers? Well, they're going to want to know what it is in a pretty simple way, and you have to maybe ask yourself if, well, is my peer-reviewed journal the most, I suppose, efficient way for me to communicate the relevance of this research to this person that has this need right now, or is it just simply a phone call, or is it simply a one-page document that identifies the scope and relevance of the research from their perspective? I mean, that's the question they're going to have. Why is it relevant from their perspective? And that's perhaps a little bit more of a sophisticated argument as well. It's not, okay, well, you have this wastewater treatment plant and that wastewater treatment plant is producing water of this quality and you can help them produce water of a better quality. That's not what the driver of the person opposite you is going to be. It's going to be, well, I have this existing budget, I have this existing regulatory challenge, I have this existing RFT or EOI being managed through our procurement process where I've got some existing money and that's what I've got, but your thing is kind of tangentially relevant. Can we talk about that? we have this existing water plan. It's a bit more sophisticated than just, you know, the good idea getting adopted. It's, okay, well, where are we in our organisation's life cycle at the moment, and how can we make this work? And I suppose, and fundamentally, they come down to, you know, what do you need from me? I mean, it's commercialisation, in my experience, is about making it very easy for the person opposite you. It's not about getting in there and saying, okay, well, here's my research, here's everything I've got, what do you think? You know, you're asking that person to go away and spend 3-5 hours of their time, a couple of days even, trying to sit back and think, what the hell, what can I do with this? You know, what kind of relevance is this to me? You have to do a bit of that thinking for them and say, I think this is of a great deal of relevance to this site, for this need, and we can move forward in this way. You have to make it easy for them, I think, is the other part of that commercialisation aspect that I think is quite relevant here. So, having said all that, I mean, I would hope that, you know, a lot of the stuff that I've been saying kind of comes across as pretty self-evident for a lot of you. I mean, looking around the room and seeing the experience in the room, I dare say, you know, your day's focused on sort of producing this research and thinking, how do I get it out there? But I suppose when we look at this from our view, and keep in mind that we're at that coalface day in, day out, meeting not just one end user like many of you may be, but meeting multiple end users, pretty much every end user in Australia, and understanding the trends and the needs that they have and the procurement cycles they go through. We think that this kind of view of the world may be a bit of I suppose, a bit too simple. You know, you're going to produce some research, you run a trial, and then someone's going to implement it. But I think it's a bit airy-fairy for me to sit here and just say, well, hell, it's more complicated. We all get that. So what we tried to do, and what we'll focus on in our session this afternoon, was to try and drill down on that a little bit deeper and say, okay, well, if we did actually think about it and try to conceptualise those different steps involved, that different value chain, what might it look like? And in doing that, we sort of bounced it around, you know, the GHD network, pretty much, I think about 5 or 6 people, you know, each with about 30 plus years of experience in consulting, one of them sitting right there right now. And we said, okay, well, what are the steps involved in your mind from your experience in channeling all the different ways clients have come to you in the past and said, I've got this challenge, this need, or all those times that you yourself have had a great idea and over the course of 10 years seen it implemented at a water treatment facility. What are those steps? So we went there, and we reckon that this is probably the best way that we can sum up those steps. And what you don't see on this slide, because it's probably a level of detail far too much, is under each of these boxes, we've come up with about 10, 20 different key drivers and questions that really reflect the sum total of those 5 or 6 individuals with their 30-odd years of experience each, thinking, here are the questions that we're constantly challenged with by clients in being able to progress new ideas and get them adopted and implemented from their perspective. And here are the things that we need to be able to have an answer to. I think the important thing, just for the purposes of today, to consider is that as far as where the research in this room is considered, I don't believe the centre's advocating that anyone in this room be responsible for driving your research all the way through this value chain. I suppose our fundamental view, however, is that once you look at the world from our perspective, this market-driven perspective, and have a look at all these questions that sit under here, which we're just channeling based on our client experience, that the questions we get asked before an end user will say, yeah, I'll go with this, I'm going to invest my time and money in it. When you look at those questions, I think you'll find that there are some really simple ways that you can just reposition, reconceptualise your research. Not changing the scope of your research in any way, rather just saying, okay, well, actually we know all this stuff, we have all this stuff at hand, we've produced all this data. How about we just, answer that question rather explicitly, or produce a document that addresses that issue explicitly, or we involve some of the people that clearly have a role to play, those perspectives, in these different parts of the process. For instance, when you get to this maintenance and upgrade position, you have to ask yourself, well, is the person you need to influence there really the asset owner themselves, or is it the contracting company that they have gone out to manage those facilities on their behalf? Once you start thinking about the perspectives that influence these different parts of the value chain, you'll understand that there are some great opportunities to interact with those people as well to help progress your research through these different steps in the value chain from our view. What I'd like to do just briefly is just get maybe Paul up here just to talk through the process that he went through here, just and speak to it. maybe for a couple of minutes, just to, I suppose, give you a sense of it, because this is what we're going to be spending a lot of our time in our session on this afternoon.
Yep. Yes, as Matt said, he came to me with a brief that basically said, in your experience working with clients trying to introduce some new ideas, getting them to to take a bit of a risk perhaps with something that's novel, what are the things that you've had to deal with? And that's sort of based on working with GHD in the innovation space, but I also spent 10 years working with a manufacturer of products that introduce new products into markets all the time, and facing those sort of challenges in different countries throughout Asia. I mean, one of the things that just sort of going through those blocks, you know, one at a time, and picking an example with partners. The partners that you're dealing in the commercialisation process are inevitably private companies, and the first thing they're looking at is what competitive advantage does that give us. You know, they don't want that research to get out to other people. They want to take advantage of that research to make money for themselves. They want to be introducing a new product that for a while will keep them at the head of the pack, and that's their total focus. They're so commercially driven that it's hard to understand sometimes. And then sort of moving on to the trial, one of the things I found with when I was working with a material manufacturing company was getting the validation of the trial, getting the acceptance of the trial. You can go forward with results, but have they been observed by a third party? Who were the people that did the testing? Have you got confidence in that testing? How is all of that going to be justified to the people at the top that are making the decisions about whether to adopt that particular technology? Producing some supporting information. There's so much that you could do here, and it's very difficult to sort of tailor what you're going to produce. But one of the things that I look at is the comparison with the competing technologies. Inevitably, there's something out there doing what you're trying to do already, and it's that comparison process that really makes a difference. Market engagement. One of the things that you look at with designers, particularly in GHD, you're constantly measuring yourself against reasonable standards of skill and care, because you don't want to become sued. So as soon as you depart from the standards, the Australian standards, the industry guidelines, you expose yourself to a new level of risk. And what they need to have is comfort, some sort of communication of how this new technology is not going to expose them to a new level of risk that perhaps they hadn't considered before. Asset owners. Again, at the moment I work in the asset management space quite a lot of the time when I'm not doing innovation, and everything is around that life cycle costing. What is it not just going to cost us to buy this stuff and put it into place? What are the operating costs? Do we understand the energy usage? Do we understand the consumables? What is it going to cost us to replace it at the end of its life? That's whole life cycle costing. Adoption. Supply chain. You know, you get somebody who comes forward and says, I want to use this technology, and it's not ready. You've missed an opportunity. It happened on a project I was working on. We were looking at a new material for a particular situation. I knew of this company that were bringing it on. We brought them in. We talked about it. They did a really good sales pitch, and we said, right, well, we need it in 2 months' time. And they said, oh, it's a year out. You know, and all of those sorts of things leave the market with a bad taste in its mouth. Maintenance. If it's new technology, what's going to go wrong with it? People haven't used it, they don't understand the maintenance cycle, what are the bits that are going to have to be replaced, how easy is it to get in there and replace them, how's all that going to work? Is there some way that we could give the owner confidence by some sort of maintenance proposal that says it'll only cost you this much per year to run, and somebody else does that, maybe the industry partner? And then, you know, the upgrade at the end. What's it going to take when this particular technology is superseded? How are we going to move on to something new? How are we going to replace that with something sensibler?